Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Hi, I'm Bob Rush. I am your host today on Ethical Perspectives on the News. Today we're going to be discussing a topic that only gets discussed about every 10 years, but it's very important. It's redistricting, reapportionment, and we're fortunate to have with us today two excellent panelists, students of public policy, students of good government, and gentlemen with opinions, which I think we will all learn from. Andy McKean, longtime state legislator and also a county official before that. Dr. Chris Peters, long time involved in public policy and issues. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with what is this redistricting, Andy, that we have to look at? And
well, every 10 years, we need to take a look at our districts because the population changes, and we have a one person, one vote requirement in our country, and as a result, it's necessary to take a look at the districts and to come up with districts that are as evenly populated as possible.
As I understand it, legislatures did not pay much attention to this subject of redistricting for well over 150 years. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. There are some wild districts over the years until more recent times.
Okay. And then, Chris, the Supreme Court handed down some important decisions to us in the early 60s that invited or instructed state legislatures to pay attention to redistricting and recognize their obligation to find one person, one vote districts for elected officials.
You cut out just a little bit there, Bob, so I didn't hear the first part of your question.
Right. I think the Supreme Court gave us those decisions in the early 60s that gave and required state legislatures to get involved in the redistricting process. How has that gone, would you say?
I think it depends a lot on which state and when you're looking at. I did look up, I followed what's been done in Iowa here, which I'm sure we're going to talk quite a bit about because I think we have a great model. But I spent a little time in the past couple of days researching what's been happening in other states and throughout our country's history. And it's interesting, one of the things we'll probably talk about is how in Iowa we try and have a principle where our districts are compact and contiguous, so we don't have these serpentine gerrymander districts, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit. That was actually part of federal law in 1911. The Apportionment Act actually said that the district should be compact and contiguous, and that got changed in a reapportionment update in 1929. So I think it really depends. It's really interesting. It depends on where you're looking at, what state, and what time in the country, how people have done things at different times.
So states are not uniform in how they come up with redistricting. Is that correct?
They are not even now. If Ballotpedia is to be trusted, which I spent a lot of time on the last couple of days, about 20 states in the nation have some type of a commission that looks at redistricting maps. To varying degrees, the legislature may approve or not, like when we have here in Iowa. About 30 states apparently, again, according to Ballotpedia, do not have a redistricting commission. It's just done by the partisan legislatures. So it's very different depending on where you're at.
Andy, does this apply only to state legislatures redistricting, or does it affect other levels of government?
Well, it does. It it most definitely affects our congressional delegation. And that's a very, very significant issue, particularly now in these very partisan times when we have such a closely divided U.S. House. It can make a big, big difference in what party will ultimately control that very significant portion of our federal government.
How about, say, county level supervisors? Are they subject?
Yes, they are subject too, and particularly in counties that have county supervisor districts, they also have to do some reapportionment there as well.
School boards?
Well, I'm not sure how that would. I guess living in a more rural area where we have district-wide school boards, it really hasn't had much of an effect here. Perhaps in more urban areas that would be true.
Right.
I believe, but could be wrong, that the census redistricting only applies to state legislatures and congressional districts. But again, I don't think it applies to lower levels.
Well, I certainly know just from personal experience that here in Jones County, we've had to change our supervisor districts to satisfy the one person, one vote requirement.
Oh, let me just say, I don't think the state legislature probably did that.
The legislature isn't in charge of that. No.
Right. The many years ago, I was involved in reviewing reapportionment cases in the South, where oftentimes redistricting was a mechanism used to disenfranchise Black voters, whether it was at school board or on a county government form or state legislature. Do we have, is that a concern in Iowa with the Iowa plan? Andy, why don't you lead off with that?
Well, I think Iowa is certainly a more homogeneous state than the vast majority of states. So I don't really see that as a great concern that I have in the process. I have more concerns about undue partisanship and the impact that could have on the process.
Let's talk, Chris, if we may, about the Iowa plan itself. Could you give us an overview of how it's supposed to work?
Sure. I believe it's put in place in 1980. I believe is the date. One other state, I think it was Washington, has a similar plan since 1983. But so far as I can have found, Iowa's got the earliest one. But basically, the state legislature, the minority and majority leaders of each house, and anyway, it's complex, but they pick some representatives to oversee the legislative affairs committee for redistricting. And they have to pick people who are not in active office or not serving as members of a political party. And basically the LSA comes up with an initial plan, which has some certain guidelines. Again, the districts, both at the state legislative districts as well as the congressional ones, must be as compact and as contiguous as possible and not pay attention to existing partisan office holders, for example, a number of criteria like that. The first plan is submitted to the legislature, and they have a chance to either approve or deny that plan. If they deny it, the commission comes up with a second plan. Process is continued, and on the third go around, if the legislature still doesn't approve, they can then take it on their own hands and modify it, although that has not yet happened in the past 30 years.
Now,
40
Andy,
years, excuse me.
Andy, in your service, you perhaps had an opportunity to vote on more than one occasion for redistricting?
Well, actually, Bob, I was a first-term legislator back in 1981 when we passed the first reapportionment bill. And I just have to say that it was one of the most remarkable experiences in my legislative career. At that time, the Republicans controlled the governorship. Bob Ray was governor. The Republicans controlled the Senate. and the Republicans controlled the House, so they had full control of the government. And to my amazement, the Republican Party was willing to come forth with a nonpartisan reapportionment plan that is a model for the nation. And I well remember going to caucus and talking about that. And you wouldn't believe how upset a lot of the members were. In fact, they were bouncing off the walls. They were so upset because that could mean potentially the end of people's careers. And the comments were made, well, why in the world, since we have full control, why would we want to go this route? But back in those days, those were different days. The majority opinion in the caucus was it's the right thing to do, and we should do it. And it was a very, very proud moment for me as a young Republican legislator. I was very proud of our party. And quite frankly, I'd have to say that if that was going to happen today, I don't care what party is control, whether it was the Republicans or the Democrats, I don't believe we could have seen that kind of a nonpartisan approach in today's very, very partisan environment.
Chris, are we losing out if we take the legislators out of the process right at the front end and deny them the chance to come up with maps that they would prefer to some computer-drawn map?
No, I share Andy's admiration for our current plan. I think, and a lot of people who live in states where there is a lot of redistricting that benefits certain parties or certain politicians don't like the system. I like the idea that we as voters get to choose our representatives rather than our representatives choose us. So I think we are in a better place where we're at right now, and I hope that continues.
Now, in some states that don't have the Iowa plan, Andy, any observations about what they can do or can't do?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of it this time around in these very partisan times. I think in many state legislatures, you're going to see lines drawn up to help promote whatever party happens to be in control. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid in the state of Iowa. We're trying to develop our districts based on population only and not consider the incumbents or the political affiliation of people in the district.
I happen to be paying close attention to the Colorado redistricting efforts at this time, and they've come out with the first plans, and the criticism has been from both parties that there are not enough competitive districts. They want to, and apparently can, input political data into drawing the maps. Chris, that's not so though in Iowa, right? When the Legislative Service Agency comes up with a map, can they input what your political registration or voting records may have been?
No, they're not supposed to. So, as to my knowledge, they do not do that. Again, they just look at things like county borders, population centers, and try and make those as compact and contiguous as possible. Colorado also has a commission system, I believe, but their criteria may be somewhat different than ours if what you're saying is true. I haven't followed that.
Yes. So
I will say, if I can, I looking at a little bit, talking about trying to analyze outcomes in redistricting is interesting. And one of the arguments is that we should be creating purposely more competitive districts. That certainly is one metric. I'm not sure it's the best one. But according to one study I read, looking at non-partisan redistricting like we have in Iowa does not necessarily generate more competitive districts in evaluations of other states. Again, that's research that I just read, so I haven't really vetted it fully, but it seems interesting. But again, evaluating for competitiveness, I think, is a good one. My important one is just to make things as fair as we can, in the sense that it's really obvious where you're voting because where you live and how what the population is, not other factors like partisan lean.
And Andy, as a legislator, when you saw the first redistricting plan placed in front of you under the new law, were you limited or could you amend that first bill?
Oh, no. You cannot amend the first bill. And then you either take it or leave it. And then the Legislative Service Bureau had, I think it's 45 days to come up with a second plan, which again, you take it or leave it. And it was kind of fascinating to look around the chamber, because there were winners and losers with each plan. And of course, a lot of people were certainly thinking of their own personal situation. But then when the third plan comes along, again, you can take it, but at that point, and that's where the mischief can enter the picture. If you don't take it, then the legislature itself can start coming up with amendments to that plan. And I might point out that we've had 4 different censuses since we first passed the reapportionment plan, and we have not yet had an occasion where we haven't accepted either the first, second, or third plan. And I should add, I think it's kind of an interesting little tidbit. In the last time we had reapportionment, which was 2011, they rejected the first plan, they rejected the second plan, and then the third plan came along, and it was looking like there was a possibility that we might start seeing a more partisan approach and amendments being filed. But the Speaker of the House at that time, the Republican Speaker of the House, Craig Polson, made the comment, which I think was very admirable. He said, this third plan might not be favorable to us, quite possibly, but it's fair. And they went ahead and adopted the third plan. And I think that shows Iowa government as it should be. And I hope and pray, quite frankly, that we can see that kind of statesmanship again this time around.
Chris,
Agreed.
Chris, any changes that come to your mind on if you were to be given that opportunity to fine tune the Iowa plan, or do you find it acceptable?
No, I find it acceptable. It seems to be working. I think the only change you could consider making, but I don't think it's likely, is as in some states, they don't allow the legislature to have a say and it just goes to a commission, but that's only a few states that do it. So I think the system, we've been doing it for 40 years. It seems to be working. I'm all for sticking with it. I think it's really interesting hearing Andy talk about people in the legislative body going, I wonder if someone would go, God, I wish I would have voted for that first plan because this is worse. Would have really liked to have seen that live.
Well,
I can tell you when I can remember sitting in the legislature when that first plan arrived, and they came in and put it on everybody's desk, and then I looked at people opening it, and they would be opening it like this and be glaring at it. And of course, they'd be looking exactly at their district to see just how it panned out. And as you're absolutely right, there were people who just begged to take the first plan because it would happen to be great for them, but they hated to see it go on to plan number 2, because once you leave plan 1, it's gone forever.
Yeah.
So I can recall when the law was passed, the bill was passed in the legislature, being on the Senate side of the rotunda, that, as Andy said, in the House, some for and some against. And it was a very bipartisan approach. Some Democrats, some Republicans against it, but majority in favor of it. And for 40 years, I guess it's worked. It's worked. What would be your thoughts? There are some deadlines set out in the law that now may have been impacted by a Supreme Court order. But what does the law provide for, Andy or Chris, as far as deadlines that are imposed upon the legislature to get a bill passed? Either of you, gentlemen.
Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, well, typically we'd be at the deadline right about now. And if the legislature is unable to come up with a plan, the court would get involved. But due to COVID-19 and also the very late census, the court has extended that period to December 1st. So if the legislature can't get their act together and get something passed by December 1, then the Iowa Supreme Court would move forward and develop a plan.
Okay. Chris, does that sound like adequate time to get some redistricting accomplished?
Having never done it, I really can't speak to it. So I think you all probably have been more up and close than I have. So sure, I could write it today. Give me a second.
But I could tell you this: there are a lot of incumbents out there who are secretly very, very pleased to see this thing delayed as long as possible, because the worst thing that an incumbent can have is to have a good opponent up and running and already getting well known in the district. And in most years, you'd have the districts figured out long before now, and you would have people jockeying for a position. So this has been a real benefit, I think, for incumbents, and which is not what the process is supposed to be promoting.
Chris, I've heard that there's almost developed a cottage industry of experts who are for hire in other parts of the country who will draw up that most slanted reapportionment map that you want, and they'll give you that data. They'll present that map to you. So let's just, in our remaining minutes here, Andy, if you would give us some observations about this term gerrymandering. What really does that mean? And does the Iowa plan eliminate that issue?
If the Iowa plan is followed to the extent that the legislature ends up taking Plan 1, Plan 2, or Plan 3, yes, it avoids gerrymandering. But if this year the legislature makes a decision not to accept Plan 1, Plan 2, and then they decide to amend Plan 3, there's a real opportunity for gerrymandering. And I'm very concerned that that's a possibility in this year. This is a very, very partisan time. These unprecedented and I'm fearful that there is a possibility that despite all the assurances we've had that everybody loves this, the Iowa approach, if Plan 1, Plan 2, or Plan 3 does not appeal to enough of the folks in the Republican and the majority party, that they could very well make a decision to move forward with amendments, which I think would be a very unfortunate precedent.
Now, Chris, again, coming back, if you're an incumbent, shouldn't you be given that deference and draw a map that's more in your favor than what some computer has come up with?
Again, I don't think so. I like the idea that we voters pick our representatives, not the other way around. So Incumbents need to be subject to the rules of competition, just like we do in a marketplace of goods. So no, I don't think we need to have any special advantages that they don't already have. They probably need fewer.
Okay. What would be your observations, Andy, as far as how to encourage the legislators to not be tempted by gerrymandering? How do you go about making that persuasive argument?
Well, I guess what has been done so far is that we have a lot of folks in the majority party on record saying how much they like the current Iowa plan, and how and assuring us that they have no plan to do anything different. But as I recall, there was no plan to privatize Medicaid. There was no plan to gut collective bargaining. There was no plan to politicize the appointment of judges, selection of judges. But yet that happened. So I'm not ruling out that possibility that we could see some gerrymandering down the line this upcoming year. But I'm hopeful that there's enough recognition, certainly around the country, but right here in Iowa, that we have a good, fair, nonpartisan approach. And I'm very, very hopeful that when the dust settles, that the legislature will once again strike a blow for good government and accept one of the nonpartisan plans.
Chris, how can the public play a part in this process and encourage legislators to avoid that temptation of gerrymandering?
Sure, I think reach out to your representatives, particularly the Republican representatives and senators who are the ones who will make the decision, and say, you'll be very disappointed if you don't do what we want, which is sticking with the plan.
Okay. And the law provides for a public hearing after or in advance of the votes on the first plans. Is that correct? Where the commission would be receiving input from general public.
I can't speak to that one.
Okay. Andy, can you?
Yes, I know that in the process there is an opportunity for public input.
Well, let me then ask Andy to go forward with any closing observations, and then Chris, you follow, please.
Well, just very briefly, one of the highlights of my legislative career was being there when I saw the nonpartisan reapportionment bill pass the legislature. And I think it's a model for the nation. I think we should be very, very proud here in Iowa that we've, over the years, have had a reputation for good, clean government. And I hope and pray that will continue once again in 2021.
Thank you. Chris?
Keep Iowa first in the nation by keeping the Iowa process intact for redistricting.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your comments and observations tonight. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.